Welcome to the Masters of Influence podcast, where we dissect how power actually works in the real world. I'm Jeff Lair, and together with my co-host, Joe Rojas, we explore the machinery behind influence and control and all of the systems that shape our lives. And today we're pulling back the curtain on one of the most, what may be one of the most overhyped technologies, or the end of the world as we know it. It's one or the other, and that is quantum computing. You've no doubt heard the breathless predictions. It'll crack every encryption system. It'll solve problems that no classical computer can do. It may be the end of privacy as we know it, and it may even prove a multiverse theory. But what's interesting is that most of what we've heard is actually bullshit, or at least it's wildly premature. So we brought in two experts who actually understand this stuff. We have Dr. Keeper Sharkey, who grew up in Las Vegas doing atomic bomb drills. Some of us remember that, and we may be aging ourselves, but doing bomb drills, which got her interested in how atoms work, and shuffling cards and gambling. Well, not gambling, but playing gambling games, which turns out to be a great way to understand quantum probabilities. She's one of the most influential people in quantum computing now. She's the vice chair of the Quantum Use Cases Technical Advisory Committee of the Quantum Economic Development Consortium. She runs her own business, ODE L3C, which focuses on quantum awareness and education. And she's chair of the IEEE P 1947 standards for quantum security framework. She's also chair of the Quantum Technologies and Cybersecurity Cross-Sector Council. And in all this free time that she has when she's not running the world, she wrote an award-winning book on chemistry and computing. And joining her is Reesë Tuttle. We talked to her a couple of weeks ago, and she's come back to talk a bit more about quantum computing. She does not have as many titles, but give her time. It will not be long, I assure you. She is a cyber threat researcher who runs her own cybersecurity firm, APT2T Labs, and is secretary of the IEEE 1947 standards for a quantum security framework. She herself is diving into where the quantum computing intersects with cybersecurity, and also asking some of these uncomfortable questions about what it is, where it's going, and whether the technology is even going anywhere. What we discovered in this conversation was really interesting because it goes well beyond computing, and we started talking about limits of human understanding, the difference between probability and reality, and why your brain might actually be the most sophisticated quantum computer we'll ever encounter, and why that means that algorithms are probably never going to be able to think like human beings. So with that, let's head on over to the interview. So with that, we will cut over to the discussion with Dr. Keeper Sharkey and Reesë Tuttle. Curious. I'm super excited to chat with the two of you today. The thing I think that keeps me awake the most isn't so much that surveillance state that we can see, the cameras, the phone tracking, the data collection. We've talked about that, Reesë. It's really the surveillance that we're building and this technology that we don't understand, like what's available to us in the future. And last time, Reesë, we talked about how, kids really can't be kids anymore because everything's recorded, everything becomes evidence for the future. And then we see what's coming with quantum computing. One of the themes that we talk about at the Masters of Influence is just this idea of how technology is transforming societies, transforming powers, transforming how we work. And here we come with quantum computers that can take codes that we're going to take years, that can crack it in a few seconds, right? We're talking about databases, holding on to databases that we can't get into now because with quantum computing we'll be able to do it. AI systems that process every piece of data about you at the speed that you can think, and some of these things just have profound implications for how we're going to live and work. And then there's also this little thing about how apparently quantum computing may actually have proven parallel realities or multiple worlds, which, I mean, there's that too, which is interesting. So I'm super excited to be talking to Dr. Keeper Sharkey and Reesë Tuttle. Reesë, you don't have a doctorate yet. What's holding you up? I mean, when is it? What's going on here? I mean, you've already had a couple of decades of life. I don't know what's but two brilliant women who know a lot more about these things than I'm ever going to, and they're going to talk to us today a bit about quantum computing. And Reesë Keeper, thanks for joining us. Welcome.
Yes.
Pretty welcome.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, me too. So I guess we'll start with the question that Joe asked at the very beginning before we even hit record, the one that now I desperately want to know the answer to, but we didn't do it because we hadn't hit record yet. So, Keeper, what got you into this? With all of this stuff that you're doing, I mean, what brought you into quantum?
Well, okay. When I was a child growing up in Las Vegas, we had to do atomic bomb drills from the Nevada test site. So if there was ever an accidental bomb that went off or something like that, we'd have to tuck under our desk and, take cover, right? And so we would practice this, and I was always like, okay, what is this quantum stuff, and what does this really mean? Quantum mechanics and
Yeah.
Growing up in Vegas, there's gambling all the time, right? So gambling is a really interesting game when it comes to understanding how the cards can play out. So it's probability, and quantum mechanics is very probabilistic.
I love
so
that,
you have
yeah.
so I started thinking about, my grandparents put a deck of cards in my hands at a very young age, probably about 3 years old, as soon as I was able to shuffle cards. And I realized that if you really wanted to understand quantum, you had to understand chemistry. What is chemistry? What is all of the stuff around us? What is matter? What are reactions?
Yeah.
And so I became a major in chemistry, and soon I learned, well, if you really want to understand chemistry and quantum, you're going to have to know mathematics. Quantum is really the language of mathematics as it applies to chemical systems and states of matter. And so there's these rules. They call them the postulates of quantum mechanics, and they're not proven to be true. All we can do is try to mimic them by making measurements, and that's basically what quantum computing is measurement science. We're basically taking a measurement of a quantum system, and you can call it a camera. So basically a quantum computer is a camera that's taking a picture of a quantum system for the measurement and measuring the state of which that quantum system is in at the time of that picture.
Okay.
Right? That's the most basic idea of what a quantum computer is. But so I realized that you had to know all of these things, and I had to become pretty mature, young person to understand that. And once I started putting all the pieces together, it just kind of clicked one day, and I was like, oh, I get this. And I started doing mathematics and derivations and publishing.
That's very
and
cool.
By the time I was done with grad school, I had 25 papers published on quantum.
Once you find that thing that draws you in, it's just a joy, right?
Yeah.
That's great.
Yep.
But it makes perfect sense to me because, to me, Vegas is like a parallel universe.
It really is
the multiverse right there. I mean, Vegas itself proves the multiverse.
From another
Exactly.
dimension, so it's perfect sense. So far, I'm tracking.
Yeah.
So,
well, and it's true. I always talk about this. Like, even the game of poker, there's 3 different games. You have what the cards are actually doing, and where the probability of what's going to be in whose hand. And but then you also have the game of betting, which is a completely different game, and you have to be able to play betting at the same time as understanding what the cards are doing. And then you also have the game of personality, so you can walk up to the table and be whoever it is that you want to be. You don't have to be whoever you are. And that's where the multiverse gets really interesting, because you can be a superposition of lots of
multiple
different
things all at the same time.
Yeah.
Look, I mean, that
Exactly.
sounds great. Honestly, I'd like to be multiple things at the same time. I mean, it certainly would make multitasking a lot easier, right? If we could exist in these different states. If we look at quantum computing as a camera, like you're talking about, how does it, what is it? Like, what is a quantum computer and how is it fundamentally different than regular computing? Remembering that I use the 30-second button on my microwave because like programming a whole minute in is too complicated. So like,
Yeah.
and I don't know which one of you wants to take this one on, but I'd love to hear like just what's the synopsis, the quick bit about how quantum computing is different.
You know, we have the idea of what we have the idea of what computing is, right? So computing is based on the fundamental theory of ones and zeros, on and off, right? These switches, okay, and bits. And classical computing is you're either in a 1 or a 0. But fundamentally, we have boxed a quantum computer into being able to be in a state of 1 or 0 at the same time, right? And so that superposition of being in 1 or 0 is the flexibility of a quantum computer, but it actually gets a lot more complicated than just 1 and 0. A quantum computer literally is just using physics, particle physics, to run operations at the tiniest scale, at the quantum scale. And those operations, we understand them within an uncertainty principle, which is one of the postulates of quantum mechanics. And within that uncertainty principle is going to allow us a certain knowledge of what the quantum computer is actually doing. And that uncertainty is kind of baked into what a quantum computer is. So you'll often hear that a quantum computer has to be run multiple times. You'll have to make many, many measurements in order to get a convergence on the answer. And that's because we don't know what it's going to do every single time. And so, but they're getting better and better, and the predictabilities.
So it's a computer. You don't know
so
exactly what it's going, like silicon, it's going to go 0 or 1, but with this, it can do lots of different things at the same time. And you don't know where it's going to go. Okay. Yeah. Well, that makes sense. Reesë, what brought you into quantum computing?
Okay, I didn't really know much about it when I was in high school, which was only a couple years ago, actually. And funny enough, I didn't really get into quantum computing until like right before I actually met Keeper, which was I think about a year and a half ago.
A year ago,
Yeah, a year ago, year and a half ago. And I had just started like exploring it before we met, and then we had a mutual friend introduce us, and then she kind of introduced me even more to the world of it. And then I was like, whoa, this is like affecting a whole lot more than I thought. I didn't realize like how big like quantum is generally and how many different fronts it affects and the possibilities. And what I think and what I find the most fascinating about it is theoreticals and the hypotheticals that could come out of it. I think that's interesting because since I feel like quantum is something we're trying really, really hard to understand. And Keeper, would you agree? Like, I feel like quantum is still something we're really trying to get a grasp on. Do you think so?
Yeah, I think that we haven't, we're not using the full theory of quantum mechanics. We don't even know what the full theory is, technically speaking. And that's why we are having trouble getting to 1,000,000 qubits. Everybody says, oh, we're going to get to 1,000,000 qubits one day. But that system probably won't be controllable if we don't understand exactly
what we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, right now we have more or less 100 qubits that we can wrap our minds around and control. Some organizations like IBM are going up to as many as 500 or 1,000 now. And but it's debatable whether those systems are actually full qubit systems or if they're just little qubit systems in parallel or series, right?
And they don't even know.
Yeah. And they don't, well,
or they kind of know.
They'll try to there's a lot of hype.
Yeah.
There's a lot of hype, right? And so yeah, there's a lot of hype around things. And if you're not an electrical engineer, then how are you going to really know which one it is, right? And so this is an engineering problem, number one. And in a quantum computer, when we talk about the different modalities of quantum computers, there are a few different modalities that can be successful: superconducting qubits or ion traps. So when you basically take an element and you ionize it, so you lose an electron, atoms. There's quantum dots, right? So now we're talking about a little bit bigger kinds of matter. And we're not really sure where these different modalities are going to be useful and what they're useful for and why they might be different in certain scenarios. So it's right now.
If you're looking for a topic to research, this sounds like a really interesting one.
Yeah. Well, and it's coming down to material science too, right?
Yeah.
So.
But I'd like to get back to something that you said, Reesë, around the implications of this and where this is going. So it's sort of interesting. You're at the beginning of the trajectory, sort of looking at it as you become an expert, right? What are these implications? What are these things that piqued your interest when you're thinking about this computing?
Yeah, so one of the things, and like I still think I'm a complete noob when it comes to this. I can speak about it a little bit more than a lot of my peers, but I'm still learning a lot about it.
Yeah.
But one of the things I see, like, especially in cybersecurity, I think taking like the quantum world and the cybersecurity world and blending the two together is where I get really intrigued by everything. Because I think of it as like, how can a quantum computer or whatever be used in the eyes of an attacker or something like that? When quantum does become more normalized, when it does become more accessible, like quantum computers generally. Right now, it's more niche, but there's people and like on a lot of dark web forums and stuff, they're getting databases that are encrypted with like modern day encryption. But what happens when our modern day encryption is easily crackable now? I always say a quantum computer, I think, would take way longer to complete a very simple equation than our computer right now, because it's more unpredictable and it's trying to think about it more. But when you give it this like encryption
Incredibly
method that would
complex
take
problem.
yeah, exactly, a modern day encryption method that our computer can't even process for, it would say thousands of years it's going to take for it to break it. That's where I think quantum computers come into play. So once they become more normalized, because there will be a day where they become way more accessible, what's going to happen with all the attackers that has been getting access to these databases and things like that? What's going to happen to our modern day encryption methods, or how are we going to be able to keep up? And that's where I really have been thinking about it.
Yeah, and
But
from that perspective, I think if we want to make it accessible to the layperson, is current computers can only do one thing at a time. So they have to keep trying over and over and over again. When you exist in a quantum state, you can try everything at the same time. That's why it's so much faster to crack an encryption, because if there are a trillion possibilities, you can try them all at once. And then the next step is the thing is cracked. Like that's, and so that's why it's scary from a security perspective, because it can try all the probabilities at the same time. And that's something that our current computers just can't do because of the way they process. That accurate, Keeper? Did I kind of say that?
Yeah, this is kind of a twofold problem. You have to think about complexity, right? So what is the complexity of a problem? And I was working on a project with MIT and Accenture where we were thinking about the complexity behind chemical algorithms, right, and predicting states of matter. But the same thing is true for encryption, and so there's a complexity behind problems. And in fact, classical computing is optimized very efficiently, especially with high performance computing and massively parallel systems. And technically speaking, a classical computer is very good at cracking some problems, right? But the number of qubits you would actually have to have in order to scale at the size you would need to crack a problem big enough to have an advantage over a classical computer is quite large. And you would need a sufficient number of qubits. And in order to engineer a system that's that big, is virtually impossible at this point. So there is a threat, theoretically, but technically there isn't a threat right now because of that scaling issue. Just for chemical algorithms, being able to have an advantage on a quantum computer, we're looking at the possibility of maybe the year 2050 to be able to simulate molecules with a quantum computer more accurately than with classical computing.
So it's that far out in terms of being
It's
really
that far
useful.
out. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So nobody's breaking into any business anytime soon with their 5 minutes of time on the local IBM quantum computer.
No, that's not happening. No.
Well, that's good to know.
Even with the superposition and all of that thing, the threat isn't as, I mean, if we are able to engineer quantum systems and move past noisy scale on our immediate devices sooner than later, then yes, it would be a threat. And that's the issue. That's the arms race right now, is how we're engineering these systems, right? But if we stay on the current trajectory, it's very costly. So a part of that project was to look at the economic component to building a quantum computer of sizable advantage, quantum advantage. So we call this the quantum economic advantage, right?
Yeah.
And it would cost a lot of money. And so governments would have to put billions of dollars and to build a system big enough to actually have it be a problem. But where quantum is actually more useful right now is on the security side, and being able to actually secure information systems with the QKD and the PQC kinds of algorithms, so that the data isn't stolen in the first place.
Well, that's interesting. So you see,
and
see
then,
more of an application today on the protection side.
Yep.
So how's that? So
Yep.
how's that working? You're just creating vastly more complex cryptography, or what's going?
Oh, yeah. So I mean, it's a twofold problem. So we have to be able to have quantum networks, right? And so we have to be able to have quantum systems that go over large distances, communicate over large distances. And they're working on that project globally right now. The other thing is, being able to not have to have point of eyesight, right? So oftentimes, in order for this quantum network to actually work, you have to see from point to point. But we want to be able to move past that so that we can have larger networks. And then, of course, underground, in the ocean, and out in space, right? We have to be able to communicate in long distances without cords. So a lot of that is, we want to move to cordless systems, right? So teleportation, quantum teleportation is really the key here. How are we transmitting quantum information over large distances? And so that's been a huge part of the race, especially with like China saying that, oh, we can send it thousands of miles now, and we don't.
What does that mean? The teleportation? How does that work? That's the idea that these two.
So basically, you're sending a light particle, right? Think about the sun. We just had a solar storm,
Yeah.
one of the biggest solar storms. I mean, that's basically quantum information coming from the sun, and it's interacting with the atmosphere, right? And they're basically saying it happens instantaneously. There's some other theories that like every particle of light is from the Big Bang, and so I don't know
Where
about
it's
all
just
that,
circling
but
around or something.
so we're just there's a lot of strange theories out there, but at the end of the day, we need to be able to send information from one point to another, and that's going to be with light or matter. You have to be able to send small particles across large distances and ensure that it gets there. I mean, that's basically what astronomy is. Being able to measure the stars is basically quantum technology, right? So we're taking pictures of the sky with the light that is being emitted from far distances, and we're able to take a picture of it. So oftentimes when you talk about quantum sensing, that's what quantum sensor is, taking pictures of the light coming from far away. And that's another thing that I like to talk about is the cosmic background radiation. That's how they measure that, is by a big camera, right? And so that's what a quantum computer is. Instead of looking at the sky and looking at the stars and the background cosmic radiation and all of that stuff through a camera, we're taking a camera and focusing it really small on really small systems and being able to take a picture of that. So that's all it is.
And then you agitate it in a certain way, and then through that get some sort of response, and you measure the response.
Yep.
Question, because I know that this has been an issue for standard computing, not a big deal. It doesn't happen all the time. But what's the impact of neutrinos that are just kind of flying around all over the place on quantum computing, if any at all?
Well, yeah. So oftentimes, like, these systems are very delicate, right? So they have to be isolated in a container and in a vacuum, very cold environments. And even people walking around can affect the measurements. So oftentimes researchers at universities will do their measurements late at night when students aren't out walking around on campus during the daytime.
Like people walking around on campus.
Yes, will affect, cause problems. Yep. Yep. They've had a hard time taking quantum computing to space. So there's a couple companies that are trying to do this out on the International Space Station. But again, when you're in a microgravity environment, even as tiniest vibrations can affect those. So yes, in terms of what kinds of particles can impact these systems, obviously that's going to come down to the kind of quantum information that those systems are made up of, whether it's bosonic or fermionic, and how they interact with whatever particle is impacting it. But yeah, very delicate
And there,
systems.
the next question. Well, I had a question now about, because our whole podcast is about power, right? And one of the things that you said is that everybody's got to spend all this money, because whoever ends up with the working quantum computer has won the game, basically, right? So if we go back out, and I think, Jeff, I don't know if that's where you wanted to go, but if we go back out, because we could get into the science.
Well, so
of it,
I
but if
guess
we go back-
what I'd like to do is get a little philosophical here, right? Because what I'm finding interesting right now is we're talking about AI systems, and one of the things we keep saying is we don't really know how it works, and now we're moving into quantum systems, and we don't really know how they work, right? Are we developing technology that's just beyond our capacity to understand, and is that a risk? I mean, you might be able to understand it, Keeper, but I mean, mortals, can we? Is
Yeah,
it
mortals like us.
That's where the whole like demystifying all this stuff comes into play, because AI is really nothing more than a mathematical model
Right.
based on probability, right? But there's two kinds of probability structures. There's the quantum information science, which is a certain kind of probability structure, and then there's classical probability, and those two are different. Classical probability is not the same as quantum probability, and so those two are different mathematical forms. And a lot of people think that AI is gonna like become conscious and all this stuff, and it just simply doesn't have the mathematical structure to be able to do all of that. That's why like you get like these dysphoria AI systems, right? You
Like
know,
it like hallucinates because it's not
It
complex
hallucinates.
enough to even understand like sentience or something
But
like
it's
that.
like the
I
hallucination is
right.
because it just doesn't understand what
Yeah.
it's. I think the AI itself doesn't understand what it's doing.
Yeah, no,
No,
it's
it's
based
based
on
on
probability.
Right.
And classical
classical
probability. Now, when you go to the quantum side, it's a little bit different. The probability structure is not the same as classical probability. But I also don't think that nature does mathematics either. So I don't think that a quantum computer, even if we are using a quantum computer to enhance AI, I don't think it's going to be able to do math. So math is a construct like language, but
Interesting.
far more complicated. Yeah. So I do not think that AI or quantum systems will be able to actually perform
Thinking.
solve mathematical problems that,
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Oh, that's interesting because it's just not a natural state. It's not a thing that nature does. It's not adding and
It's
subtracting.
right. Yeah. Yeah. It's not something that nature.
So is that the ultimate control then? I'm in the robots taking over the world mode here,
yeah.
right? So like but the ultimate thing is, okay, you can't really take over the world because we can do math. Which I'm not minimizing, by the way. I think that came out as kind of silly, but that's a big deal, right? So how could you possibly be the dominant species if you can't add and subtract, right?
Right. You can't do the math. Yeah, that's the crux of the matter for me. I get really frustrated because it's like there's so many mathematical problems out there that we can't solve. We post about it all the time. There's Nobel Prizes, $1 million on the line for being able to solve these problems, and AI is not going to be able to do it, and not in the current state. And I don't think a quantum computer will ever be able to get there. And the complexity behind the algorithm that would solve a problem like that would be far too complicated.
Because
A human wouldn't be able to create that.
Ultimately, it all comes back to an algorithm that either we create or that's created by another algorithm, but it's still just an algorithm, right? It's still just performing calculations. It's still just moving bits or qubits or whatever from place to place and measuring it and testing it. It's still not creative.
I would say they're not doing calculations, they're doing operations.
Okay. Fair enough.
I'm gonna sound really cliche for a second, but there's no life to it. It's not like it's literally doing like equation and like algorithms and things, like, whereas like with you and I, that's not how we operate.
Yeah.
And So I think the whole thing of like it becoming sentient, I
Well-
understand the thought process behind it, but like when you're looking at it from like a technical standpoint, it doesn't add up, I should say.
What I'm hearing is this: the AI, these algorithms just aren't going to have the creative capacity. Like, there's something insanely creative about imagining the solution to one of these crazy mathematical problems, or being able to look at things in a different way. It's actually amazing that we have that capability, and creating an algorithm that can do that, it just is probably
Right.
impossible.
So now I want to throw the, I don't know, whatever, the twist in the thing, which is, then what of technologies like Neuralink that allow for using a brain for this type of computation in the long term, not short term. I don't think short term it's there, but now that you can take these algorithms, or you take the quantum computer, you can take a human brain, throw them all into a
And now
pot.
you're building the AI. You're building the quantum computer into the brain.
What
Well, I don't know.
happens-
Like that would be an interesting
But-
combination, right?
because there is this
So
biological
I
component.
think
I think-
Keeper has an opinion on this. She looks like she's in pain.
Yes. Okay. So there's a classic example that I like to give. And that's lithium. The element is used as an antidepressant. Okay. One particular isotope of lithium works as an antidepressant and the other one
Mhm.
doesn't. Okay. And lithium 6 versus lithium 7. And that has to do with the nuclear components of the spin of being a fermion or a boson, and how the spin of the nucleus of the lithium in the brain is interacting with the synapses, and it is creating some kind of quantum information that allows our brain to work more optimally, which is the antidepressant component to that. There is no real good medical theory right now to describe why that's the case, because the brain synapses are far more complicated than just the lithium nucleus and being able to describe that. But at the most basic level, it comes down to spin. It comes down to the magnetic spin of the nucleus and how that's interacting with the matter around it in the brain. Another aspect of that is the mass of the nucleus. So as you add another neutron, the mass is changing, right? So lithium 6 and lithium 7 are not the same mass. And the mass is affecting the way the electrons form around that lithium. It becomes tighter as the mass gets heavier because of, you can think of it as like gravity. So the electron density changes, and then the way the electrons are then interacting as well also changes. So there's quite a bit of quantum information science happening in terms of chemistry and the consciousness of what's happening in the brain. There are a lot of theories out there that this is happening in DNA, and how the DNA is doing the computing, and why certain base pairs, right? So there's a quantum information science within DNA, and how is DNA really doing the computation? And so they're very interested in building a device to see if they can measure the quantum information and genetic code. So yeah, there's a lot going on in the industry when it comes to understanding consciousness from a quantum information science perspective.
So Joe's not crazy, is what I'm taking away from this.
Yeah, no, it's real. It's you know, it's
Yeah.
it right.
So yeah, because I think so far the most impressive computer we've been able to encounter is the human brain, and so how does that work?
When-
And we'll come
Right.
into, and can we turn a brain into a quantum computer? That's the real question, Dr. Keeper. Can we do it?
I mean, arguably it is doing quantum computing, right? But the idea is, can you send a device into the brain and make measurements? That would be really, or can you make an operation? Can you do mind control then? Because if you can send a thing, a pulse, and you can control and manipulate someone's brain, then, oh yeah, they've been doing
Wow,
this
this
for
is cool.
years.
Can we
I'm
can
just-
we
I don't know.
can we test it on Joe?
Sure.
Yeah, he's a test subject.
That would be we'll put one of these little cameras in your head, and then have your brain cells go into these quantum states so that we can take pictures of them and see if
See-
you can solve complex problems.
I wouldn't let Elon
This is what
do
an
it.
MRI is.
See,
You know, in the medical field, an MRI is nothing more than magnetic resonance imaging, right? So they're taking your they're literally putting you in a magnet that's spinning around really
Yeah.
fast and messing with the spin of your nuclei, and then they're able to measure that and take a picture of you. That's a quantum computer.
That's interesting.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, that's you
Yeah.
as a quantum, and they're basically turning you into a measurement.
So how?
Whoa.
It's weird.
That is weird. What?
Cool. So how do we use the MRI to I don't know. Now I'm lost. So you somehow have to stimulate the brain in order to create the answer to the question that you're looking for, that you would then measure with the MRI.
Yeah, so there's a lot of ways that I think that they've been able to do this, but I'm no medical doctor or anything like that. But I mean, it's basically having somebody perform a task while they make the measurement and see if they can measure the difference in the brainwaves. But they use AI to identify disease in these images, right? Because it's not possible for one human to sit there and pick out all the little nuances. So they train a whole bunch of data on prior identification of disease through these MRIs, and then they're able to learn very fast right away whether or not you have a thing because of the AI tools that they're using now. That's to assist a doctor, and so we shouldn't be relying on that kind of stuff as the sole answer. Yeah, no, I think the brain is doing quantum computing to have answers and understands threat analysis. Like when you're understanding how risky a situation is, your brain is actually doing that. It's analyzing
Active probability.
active probability. And you might not know that you're doing it. Some people get really good at this and they can say, oh yeah, these are the different outcomes that can happen. But probability isn't necessarily that the different worlds are happening at the same time. It's all about the outcome, right? So it's the outcomes are real until you actually get there. And then once you're there and you make a measurement of that time and space, you collapse to the one outcome, right?
It's the dual slit experiment. But
Well, no, but it's almost like what you're saying is the quantum computing is trying to do what the brain is already doing. So you're trying to create the quantum computer is trying to recreate that processing capacity, or that not capacity, but the processing the way that the brain processes.
Yeah, because I mean, if you think about it, like a brain obviously can also process multiple probabilities at one time. You can think about multiple possible outcomes. Yeah, but multiple possible outcomes at once. And I think kind of with a quantum computer, you have to sometimes you have to redo it multiple times. And sometimes you're the probability, the outcome that you thought maybe isn't also necessarily always accurate, but it's mostly accurate. Just like with quantum computers, it's like you have to restart it, however you explained it, Keeper. But I'm still learning the terms for this. But I think, yeah, I've never thought about that, but the brain does operate like a quantum computer does operate like a brain, quote unquote, I guess you could say. But that's whoa. That's
but what's cool about this is actually it sort of reinforces the dominance of our brains and the way that we think in humanity. And it's actually pretty special how we think and how the brain works. It's not something you can create in a data center in the middle of Indiana, right? There's just a magic to the way that the brain works still, that you're looking at one qubit or one thing, and all of the infrastructure that has to go onto that, and then we have these things that's basically happening in our head on a regular basis.
So question for Dr. Keeper is a qubit the technological equivalent of a neuron, or is it more than that or less than that?
I think it's less than that. So yeah, the qubit has really been boxed in to a very specific definition based on our idea of what computing is, which our idea of computing is not how the world works, right? So computing, if we want to say that the universe is doing computing, then that's not how classical computing is. That's two totally separate ideas. So we've taken a qubit and tried to box it into our idea of classical computing. What is really happening is far more complicated. So the idea of a qubit is literally just manipulating the spin in a particular momentum space, more or less. But when it comes to real chemistry and real quantum information science, you have the quantum numbers, right? So you have the principal quantum number, and then you have the spin quantum number, and you also have the angular momentum quantum number. And there's rules on how these quantum numbers can actually interact with one another. And they're called selection rules. And it's far more complicated than the idea of a qubit. So and when it comes to chemistry and
So,
measurement science and chemistry,
so
yeah.
So if the technology shifted and we stopped trying to box it in, and we actually figured out a way to either biologically, if we were able to make that shift over, do you think that 2050 becomes 2030? Actually,
If we can bridge that, if we have that understanding, then it changes the trajectory significantly.
yeah, because
yes.
I think that what from my perspective anyway, what's been missing is a collaboration between the chemists and the quantum physicists and the
Yep, and the
biologists
biologists, yeah.
in
Yep.
this dance, because we keep trying to strip away the thing that makes it work.
Right. Yes, because of our limited understanding.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's absolutely 100% true.
Look, we're at time, really. But if you have a couple of minutes, I have two more questions for you. Is that okay? So the first is pretty
Yeah.
simple. Do qubits prove the multi-worlds theory?
No. I think qubits prove outcome, that there's multiple outcomes. That doesn't mean
But
there's
it
multiple
doesn't
worlds.
mean that they have to exist in multiple universes to have multiple outcomes.
Yeah.
Okay. So good. We put that to bed. So it's not the next question. Super simple. Just to end, I'd like to hear from both of you. Where is this going? What is the future of quantum computing? What are you excited about? Even what you're worried about, like, where is this going? And
I'm excited for the day the hype is over. That's
I think
if we have a,
I agree.
Yeah.
I think it kind of boomed like the AI boom and how everybody started hyping up the wrong parts of it. Like everybody started overhyping AI in the wrong aspect. And now I think a lot of people's overhyping quantum in the wrong aspect. And I think, I mean, it's kind of a good and kind of a bad thing because now people's putting their focus into quantum in a area that's not necessarily the most effective. And now the part of like the people who truly do understand how quantum works, obviously they're not focusing on the part that's necessarily overhyped. I don't know if that's like the best way to explain it, but like what you were just talking about, like the combination of chemistry and the quantum understanding, the biology and all that, that's not the hype. That's not the hype of what I hear. I hear the hype of what happens when quantum and AI combine? It's going to take over the world. That's the hype.
So what's the promise of it? What's the without the hype? Is it just an interesting concept, or is this going to bring us something revolutionary?
I think when it comes to quantum sensing and the algorithms, I think we have something that's a little bit more tangible. And then we're really going to have to understand how the quantum computer is really imaging a system, right? So what does that really look like? If we want to understand the quantum information science behind that, we have to enhance the theory, and we have to be honest with ourselves about that. And do we have to revisit quantum theory from 100 years ago? Because that's what we are. It was invented 100 years ago, 1925. And it's been 100-year mark. It's the year of quantum. Are we really saying that we understand it completely now? Or are we really going to just be honest and say, do we have to go back? Because the founders of quantum mechanics warned us. They warned us in their Nobel Prize lectures. And if you go back and read what they had to say, they said, we're going down the wrong road here, guys. We got to fix this before we keep marching. And we've continued to march without actually readdressing the issues they faced.
I think
that's a real problem. Yeah.
I agree. I think that's one of the more interesting parts of it is sometimes like, do we just need to take a step back and a new approach? I've thought about that and I don't know. Like, I don't know. We know a lot more. We know a lot. I always think of this with something that's like progressing. I think about this with cybersecurity and everything. Like we have modern technologies that's being applied for like how we think of encryption, or like even with what I'm doing with my company, how people thought of security awareness training. I did the same thing. Like, how can we take a step back to base one, and how can we reinvent it or find like what we know right now and how people operate and how the technology operates and what's currently going on? How can I reposition that to work more efficiently? And I try to take that approach with pretty much everything. And I think I get curious about what's currently happening in the quantum space, and what about that can we take what we know of how things work and operate, and how can we reposition certain aspects to maybe make it work more efficiently, or even take such a big step back? Because like you said, we're 100 years in, and how can we even like reevaluate what was going on back then? So I think, I don't know, there's that. I think what excites me the most about quantum is just it's something that I don't understand,
Yeah.
and understanding it. And I know it's something that challenges my brain so much because it's pretty much trying to act like my brain. So I'm like,
So
it fascinates
and
me.
I think what I'm taking away, I don't know about Joe, but what I'm taking away is it's actually less about the computer and it's less about can it do these calculations. The part that is really interesting to me is what you just said, Reesë, is exploration of how things work. I mean, more than anything, I think that quantum computer is just helping us understand how things work at a quantum level. And it's so interesting to me how like the deeper we get, the more interesting it becomes, right? Like you think you get smaller and smaller, and it becomes more and more interesting and less and less predictable, which is really just fascinating. I think just that this study of the quantum states and the study of what's going on and creating this stuff just has so much potential to create really interesting discoveries around life and everything else.
Yeah.
For me, this was really awesome. I could talk to you for the next like 10 hours. I have so many questions. And what I think,
Yeah, I was gonna say I have another point to bring up, but
what I, and why is because of that, one, the exploration, but there's also all these other things that we're seeing, like morphic fields and the impact of the observer, and how does that all play into, like it is so interesting to me. So I'm going to be quiet because I don't want to open up another can of worms. But I think you've got one there, Dr. Keeper, right?
yeah. There's so many things we don't know. And, when, organizations come up with like quantum supremacy, it's okay. Let's just tone it down here a little bit. Cause that's, yeah, come on guys.
Right.
Yeah, but there's still a lot we don't understand, and so I think that, like for instance, computing at room temperature, right, is going to be more ideal than computing at cryogenic cooling
Ideal, yeah.
temperatures, right? Because that's not going to be very feasible on desktops if that's where we're going with quantum computing. So trying to get down to millikelvins and it takes a lot of energy and things like that. So when you talk about power and the resources, and it's not going to be feasible future for sure. But yeah, there's so many things we have to learn.
Awesome. Well, then we're good.
And there's another point in temperature that I'll tell you. And if we want to get down to 0 degrees Kelvin, which everybody always talks about, oh, can we get down to absolute zero? Blah, blah, blah. And you can't unless you actually take all matter and convert it to light. So all mass has to be converted through Einstein's equation, E equals mc squared.
In order for us to get to
zero,
absolute zero.
Zero, you have to convert all mass.
All mass.
And
mass
just so
all
that
mass.
everybody's clear, no, they're not doing that at CERN. It's not going to happen anytime soon.
All
Okay.
mass. Because any difference in mass, means there's a frequency difference, which means there's heat associated with that, which inherently means you cannot have 0 degrees.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Which is, yeah.
That's just.
So on that, this has been a great conversation. Maybe we'll have to do another one. This is lovely. Dr. Sharkey, thanks for your time, and Reesë, soon to be at some point, I imagine. Dr. Tuttle, it's a pleasure as always. Thank you so much for taking some time to chat with us. It's been this went in a completely different direction than I expected, and it's been super interesting. So thank you very much for everything.
Thank you for having us. Yeah.
It was super fun. I'd love to do it again.
That was freaking awesome.
So quantum computing is not going to take over.
It's not going to take over.
That's so interesting to me that so much of the conversation is around how quantum supercomputers are going to take over the world, or it's going to be this whole AI revolution, and really it's not. But what it is doing is something at such a fundamental level, right? Like understanding quantum mechanics, it just feels like otherworldly, but it's our world right here. It's like you're going out light years away to another planet, but it's right
But
here.
it's right here.
And that's it's just so interesting. All right, and on that, we will end this episode of Masters of Influence. If you have any thoughts on quantum computing, be sure to let us know. Maybe we will include it in a future episode. And we will see you right here in a couple of weeks for the next installment of Masters of Influence. In the meantime, stay curious.